Okay, so this is the MEI S1 January 2013 paper, question 4. At a dog show, 3 out of 11 dogs are to be selected for a national competition. So I would be picturing these 11 dogs sitting there, of which we're going to select 3 of them. So in this part of the question, we need to use some of the information we were given. So we've got 3 dogs out of 11 that we're going to choose. They're not saying we're giving out first prize, second prize, third prize. We're just choosing 3 of them. So it doesn't matter what order we put them in, and that means it's a time for us to be using the NCR formula. So NCR gives the number of ways of choosing R things from N things, and we're choosing 3 things, 3 dogs, from the 11 dogs. So most calculators that you're likely to be using will have an NCR button. On the one pictured here, it's on the divide button. So I'd type in 11, shift, and then divide, and then 3. And the calculator display will be showing me that the answer is 165. Now I'll just go back and reread the question and check I've answered what they asked for. I was asked to find the number of possible selections. So 165, pretty big number, lots of ways to choose 3 dogs out of the 11 dogs. That seems sensible. If the question had asked me about a probability, I'd be expecting an answer between 0 and 1, and then 165 would not be sensible. But I'm happy with that, so I'm ready to go on to part 2. Okay, so we now move on to part 2, which is the more difficult part of this question. We're given some extra information. We now know that there are 5 of the 11 dogs are terriers. That's a particular breed of dog. Here's a terrier over here, in case you don't know what they look like. So, assuming that the dogs are selected at random, find the probability that at least 2 of the 3 dogs selected for the national competition are terriers. So we might be able to use some information before, because we're still talking about selecting 3 dogs for the competition. What we might want to be aware of is what sorts of dogs we've got now. So they've told us we have 5 terriers. That means the rest of the dogs are not terriers. So 11 minus 5 are 6 dogs which are not terriers. I'm going to use T for terrier and T prime for not terrier. So when we're doing this, we're going to be looking at the number of ways of choosing these dogs, and so the wording of the question says at least 2. So at least 2 means 2 or 3. So that means we've either got 2 terriers and 1 dog which is not a terrier, or we've got 3 terriers. And we're looking at the number of ways of doing this out of the number of ways of selecting our 3 dogs. So our denominator is actually going to be the answer to part 1. So the denominator, the number of ways of choosing 3 dogs, that should be quite straightforward. The numerator is going to be the more difficult bit that we're trying to do. So we've got either 2 terriers and 1 dog that's not a terrier. That's the bit that people might miss. Or all 3 of the dogs are terriers. So the denominator, that was the easy bit. We can use 11C3 from before. The numerator then, the 2 terriers, 5C2 is the number of ways of choosing 2 terriers out of the 5 terriers. And we have to remember the other dog that's not a terrier. So 6C1 is the number of ways of choosing that dog that's not a terrier out of the 6 dogs that are not terriers. When we're doing the calculation, 6C1 is just 6, which is easier to type in the calculator. So the other bit, we've got the 2 terriers and 1 not terrier. The and there means that when we see the and, we're going to use a multiply in the formula, but then we have or, and the or is where we're going to add up our probabilities. Now the other option was 3 terriers, so there were 5 terriers, so 5C3 is the number of ways of choosing 3 terriers out of 5 terriers. So we can just put that into the calculator, and it seems to give us an answer of 14 out of 33. It's fine to leave the answer as an exact value like that. If we wanted to, we could use the SD button on the calculator and get that as a decimal. If we go to three significant figures, so the first three non-zero digits are 4, 2, 4. Look at the next digit, which is a 2. We don't need to round up, so it's 0.424 to three significant figures, and we write down the rounding of 3SF in the brackets. And it is a probability that we were asked for, so we're expecting a value between 0 and 1, which we have, so there's a good chance that we've done that correctly. So here's an alternative way of looking at this question that doesn't rely so heavily on the NCR thing. We're still going to need the fact that we've got 5 terriers and we've got 6 dogs that are not terriers, and we're still going to be using the idea that at least 2 means 2 or 3. What we're going to do this time is look at how we could actually do this. The easiest way is going to be looking at all 3 dogs being terriers. And the alternative to that would also be included here, would be having 2 dogs being terriers, but 1 dog would have to not be a terrier. So in this case, there's 2 dogs which are terriers and 1 dog is not a terrier, and that's the bit that people are likely to forget when answering this question. Now, getting all 3 being terriers, there's only one arrangement of those, but we need to be careful because having 1 dog that's not a terrier, there's 3 ways that we could arrange those, because the dog that's not a terrier could be in the 3rd position, as I've shown it, or in the 1st or 2nd position. Now, looking at the probabilities for the 3 dogs all being terriers, first of all, we've got 5 terriers out of 11 dogs, and, so multiply, we want another terrier. We've only got 4 terriers left, and we've only got 10 dogs left, so that's 4 out of 10. So for the final dog, we've now got 3 terriers left out of 9 dogs left. So that's the probability of getting 3 terriers. But we also need to look at having the 2 terriers and 1 not terrier. Now this is or, so we're going to add here. And same sort of idea for the first 2 terriers, 5 terriers out of 11 dogs multiplied by 4 terriers out of 10 dogs. And then this final dog, which is not a terrier, we've got 6 non-terriers out of the 9 dogs. And there are 3 ways, as we said before, that you could arrange this, so we need to multiply by 3. So putting all of that together into the calculator, we get the answer of 14 out of 33, which is exactly the same as before. We might choose to convert it to a decimal and round it to 3 sig fig, giving us 0.424. And here's the mark scheme, and the good news, first of all, is that we got the answers right. A couple of things that might be worth pointing out. The bit where we wrote 11C3 is actually written in a slightly different way. This way that looks a bit like a vector for those of you that have met vectors, or just 2 numbers written in brackets, is another way to write 11C3. You'll see that a lot in the mark schemes, but it's absolutely fine to use 11C3, which is consistent with the notation 11P3, so it's quite a handy way of notating it. In the second part of the question, we see that they've used both of the methods that I went through just before. One thing that I didn't write in, which is in here, is this bit with 6C0. So this was for saying that you could have had the 3 terriers and no non-terriers. Now it does say over here that it's okay if we've omitted to do that bit. Now I realised that having no terriers, there was only one way of choosing the non-terriers, so I left that bit out, which was okay. Although technically, I suppose, I could have written 5C3 multiplied by 6C0. It would give the same value because 6C0 is 1.